Roughing It in the Bush by Susanna Moodie. Chapter 27. Adieu to the Woods. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Moira Fogarty. Roughing It in the Bush by Susanna Moodie. Chapter 27. Adieu to the Woods. Adieu, adieu, when quivering lips refuse the bitter pangs of parting to declare, and the full bosom feels that it must lose friends who were wont its inmost thoughts to share. When hands are tightly clasped, mid struggling sighs and streaming tears those whispered accents rise, leaving to God the objects of our care, in that short, simple, comprehensive prayer, Adieu. Never did eager British children look for the first violets and primroses of spring with more impatience than my baby boys and girls watched, day after day, for the first snowflakes that were to form the road to convey them to their absent father. "Winter never means to come this year. It will never snow again," exclaimed my eldest boy, turning from the window on Christmas Day with the most rueful aspect that ever greeted the broad, gay beams of the glorious sun. It was like a spring day. The little lake in front of the window glittered like a mirror of silver, set in its dark frame of pine woods. I, too, was wearying for the snow, and was tempted to think that it did not come as early as usual, in order to disappoint us. But I kept this to myself, and comforted the expecting child with the oft-repeated assertion that it would certainly snow upon the morrow. But the morrow came and passed away, and many other morrows, and the same mild, open weather prevailed. The last night of the old year was ushered in with furious storms of wind and snow. The rafters of our log cabin shook beneath the violence of the gale, which swept up from the lake like a lion roaring for its prey, driving the snowflakes through every open crevice, of which there were not a few, and powdering the floor until it rivalled in whiteness the ground without. "Oh, what a dreadful night!" we cried, as we huddled shivering around the old broken stove. "A person abroad in the woods to-night would be frozen. Flesh and blood could not long stand this cutting wind." "It reminds me of the commencement of a laughable extempore ditty," said I to my young friend A.C., who was staying with me, "composed by my husband during the first very cold night we spent in Canada. Oh, the cold of Canada nobody knows, the fire burns our shoes without warming our toes. Oh dear, what shall we do? Our blankets are thin and our noses are blue. Our noses are blue and our blankets are thin. It's at 0 without and we're freezing within. Oh dear, what shall we do?" But joking apart, my dear A., we ought to be very thankful that we are not travelling this night to B. "But to-morrow," said my eldest boy, lifting up his curly head from my lap, "it will be fine to-morrow, and we shall see dear papa again." In this hope he lay down on his little bed upon the floor, and was soon fast asleep, perhaps dreaming of that eagerly anticipated journey, and of meeting his beloved father. Sleep was a stranger to my eyes. The tempest raged so furiously without, that I was fearful the roof would be carried off the house, or that the chimney would take fire. The night was far advanced when old Jenny and myself retired to bed. My boy's words were prophetic. That was the last night I ever spent in the bush, in the dear forest home which I had loved in spite of all the hardships which we had endured since we pitched our tent in the backwoods. It was the birthplace of my 3 boys, the school of high resolve and energetic action, in which we had learned to meet calmly and successfully to battle with the ills of life. Nor did I leave it without many regretful tears, to mingle once more with a world to whose usages, during my long solitude, I had become almost a stranger, and to whose praise or blame I felt alike indifferent. When the day dawned, the whole forest scenery lay glittering in a mantle of dazzling white. The sun shone brightly, the heavens were intensely blue, but the cold was so severe that every article of food had to be thawed before we could get our breakfast. The very blankets that covered us during the night were stiff with our frozen breath. "I hope the sleighs won't come to-day," I cried. "We should be frozen on the long journey." About noon, 2 sleighs turned into our clearing. Old Jenny ran screaming into the room. "The master has sent for us at last. The sleighs are come. Fine large sleighs, and illigant teams of horses. Och, and it's a cold day for the wee things to leave the bush." The snow had been a week in advance of us at B , and my husband had sent up the teams to remove us. The children jumped about and laughed aloud for joy. Old Jenny did not know whether to laugh or cry, but she set about helping me to pack up trunks and bedding as fast as our cold hands would permit. In the midst of the confusion my brother arrived, like a good genius, to our assistance, declaring his determination to take us down to B himself in his large lumber sleigh. This was indeed joyful news. In less than 3 hours he dispatched the hired sleighs with their loads, and we all stood together in the empty house, striving to warm our hands over the embers of the expiring fire. How cold and desolate every object appeared! The small windows, half blocked up with snow, scarcely allowed a glimpse of the declining sun to cheer us with his serene aspect. In spite of the cold, several kind friends had waded through the deep snow to say, "God bless you, good-bye," while a group of silent Indians stood together, gazing upon our proceedings with an earnestness which showed that they were not uninterested in the scene. As we passed out to the sleigh, they pressed forward and silently held out their hands, while the squaws kissed me and the little ones with tearful eyes. They had been true friends to us in our dire necessity, and I returned their mute farewell from my very heart. Mr. S sprang into the sleigh. One of our party was missing. "Jenny," shouted my brother at the top of his voice, "it is too cold to keep your mistress and the little children waiting." "Och, sure thin it is that I am comin'," returned the old body, as she issued from the house. Shouts of laughter greeted her appearance. The figure she cut upon that memorable day I shall never forget. My brother dropped the reins upon the horses' necks, and fairly roared. Jenny was about to commence her journey to the front in 3 hats. Was it to protect her from the cold? Oh, no, Jenny was not afraid of the cold. She could have eaten her breakfast on the north side of an iceberg, and always dispensed with shoes, during the most severe of our Canadian winters. It was to protect these precious articles from injury. Our good neighbour, Mrs. W , had presented her with an old sky-blue drawn silk bonnet, as a parting benediction. This, by way of distinction, for she never had possessed such an article of luxury as a silk bonnet in her life, Jenny had placed over the coarse calico cap, with its full furbelow of the same yellow, ill-washed, homely material, next to her head. Over this, as second in degree, a sunburnt straw hat with faded pink ribbons, just showed its broken rim and tawdry trimmings; and to crown all, and serve as a guard to the rest, a really serviceable grey beaver bonnet, once mine, towered up as high as the celebrated crown in which brother Peter figures in Swift's Tale of a Tub. "Mercy, Jenny! Why, old woman, you don't mean to go with us that figure?" "Och, my dear heart, I've no bandbox to keep the cold from destroyin' my illigant bonnets," returned Jenny, laying her hand upon the side of the sleigh. "Go back, Jenny, go back!" cried my brother. "For God's sake, take all that tomfoolery from off your head. We shall be the laughing stock of every village we pass through." "Och, sure now, Mr. S , who'd think of looking at an old creather like me? It's only yoursel that would notice the like." "All the world, everybody would look at you, Jenny. I believe that you put on those hats to draw the attention of all the young fellows that we shall happen to meet on the road. Ha, Jenny!" With an air of offended dignity, the old woman returned to the house to rearrange her toilet, and provide for the safety of her illigant bonnets, one of which she suspended to the strings of her cloak, while she carried the third dangling in her hand, and no persuasion of mine would induce her to put them out of sight. Many painful and conflicting emotions agitated my mind, but found no utterance in words as we entered the forest path, and I looked my last upon that humble home consecrated by the memory of 1,000 sorrows. every object had become endeared to me during my long exile from civilized life. I loved the lonely lake, with its magnificent belt of dark pines sighing in the breeze; the cedar swamp, the summer home of my dark Indian friends; my own dear little garden, with its rugged snake fence which I had helped Jenny to place with my own hands, and which I had assisted the faithful woman in cultivating for the last 3 years, where I had so often braved the tormenting mosquitoes, black flies, and intense heat, to provide vegetables for the use of the family. Even the cows, that had given a breakfast for the last time to my children, were now regarded with mournful affection. A poor labourer stood in the doorway of the deserted house, holding my noble water dog, Rover, in a string. The poor fellow gave a joyous bark as my eyes fell upon him. "James J., take care of my dog." "Never fear, ma'am. He shall bide with me as long as he lives." He and the Indians, at least, feel grieved for our departure, I thought. Love is so scarce in this world that we ought to prize it, however lowly the source from whence it flows. We accomplished only 12 miles of our journey that night. The road lay through the bush, and along the banks of the grand, rushing, foaming Otonabee River, the wildest and most beautiful of forest streams. We slept at the house of kind friends, and early in the morning resumed our long journey, but minus one of our party. Our old favourite cat, Peppermint, had made her escape from the basket in which she had been confined, and had scampered off, to the great grief of the children. As we passed Mrs. H.'s house, we called for dear Addie. Mr. H. brought her in his arms to the gate, well wrapped up in a large fur cape and a warm woollen shawl. "You are robbing me of my dear little girl," he said. "Mrs. H. is absent. She told me not to part with her if you should call, but I could not detain her without your consent. Now that you have seen her, allow me to keep her for a few months longer." Addie was in the sleigh. I put my arm about her. I felt I had my child again, and I secretly rejoiced in the possession of my own. I sincerely thanked him for his kindness, and Mr. S. drove on. At Mr. R.'s we found a parcel from dear Amelia, containing a plum cake and other good things for the children. Her kindness never flagged. We crossed the bridge over the Otonabee, in the rising town of Peterborough, at 8 o'clock in the morning. Winter had now set in fairly. The children were glad to huddle together in the bottom of the sleigh, under the buffalo skins and blankets; all but my eldest boy, who, just turned of 5 years old, was enchanted with all he heard and saw, and continued to stand up and gaze around him. Born in the forest, which he had never quitted before, the sight of a town was such a novelty that he could find no words wherewith to express his astonishment. "Are the houses come to see one another?" he asked. "How did they all meet here?" The question greatly amused his uncle, who took some pains to explain to him the difference between town and country. During the day we got rid of old Jenny and her bonnets, whom we found a very refractory travelling companion, as wilful and far more difficult to manage than a young child. Fortunately we overtook the sleighs with the furniture, and Mr. S. transferred Jenny to the care of one of the drivers, an arrangement that proved satisfactory to all parties. We had been most fortunate in obtaining comfortable lodgings for the night. The evening had closed in so intensely cold that although we were only 2 miles from C, Addie was so much affected by it that the child lay sick and pale in my arms, and when spoken to seemed scarcely conscious of our presence. My brother jumped from the front seat and came round to look at her. "That child is ill with the cold. We must stop somewhere to warm her, or she will hardly hold out till we get to the inn at C." We were just entering the little village of A, in the vicinity of the court house, and we stopped at a pretty green cottage, and asked permission to warm the children. A stout, middle-aged woman came to the sleigh, and in the kindest manner requested us to alight. "I think I know that voice," I said. "Surely it cannot be Mrs. S., who once kept the hotel at C?" "Mrs. Moodie, you are welcome," said the excellent woman, bestowing upon me a most friendly embrace. "You and your children! I am heartily glad to see you again after so many years. God bless you all." Nothing could exceed the kindness and hospitality of this generous woman. She would not hear of our leaving her that night, and directing my brother to put up his horses in her stable, she made up an excellent fire in a large bedroom, and helped me to undress the little ones who were already asleep, and to warm and feed the rest before we put them to bed. This meeting gave me real pleasure. In their station of life, I seldom have found a more worthy couple than this American and his wife, and having witnessed so many of their acts of kindness, both to ourselves and others, I entertained for them a sincere respect and affection, and truly rejoiced that Providence had once more led me to the shelter of their roof. Mr. S was absent, but I found little Mary, the sweet child who used to listen with such delight to Moody's flute, grown up into a beautiful girl, and the baby that was a fine child of 8 years old. The next morning was so intensely cold that my brother would not resume the journey until past 10 o'clock, and even then it was a hazardous experiment. We had not proceeded 4 miles before the horses were covered with icicles. Our hair was frozen as white as old Time's solitary forelock, our eyelids stiff, and every limb aching with cold. "This will never do," said my brother, turning to me. "The children will freeze. I never felt the cold more severe than this." "Where can we stop?" said I. "We are miles from sea, and I see no prospect of the weather becoming milder. Yes, yes, I know, by the very intensity of the cold, that a change is at hand. We seldom have more than 3 very severe days running, and this is the 3rd. At all events, it is much warmer at night in this country than during the day. The wind drops, and the frost is more bearable. I know a worthy farmer who lives about a mile ahead. He will give us house room for a few hours, and we will resume our journey in the evening. The moon is at full, and it will be easier to wrap the children up and keep them warm when they are asleep. Shall we stop at old Woodruff's?" "With all my heart." My teeth were chattering with the cold, and the children were crying over their aching fingers at the bottom of the sleigh. A few minutes' ride brought us to a large farmhouse, surrounded by commodious sheds and barns. A fine orchard opposite, and a yard well stocked with fat cattle and sheep, sleek geese, and plethoric-looking swine, gave promise of a land of abundance and comfort. My brother ran into the house to see if the owner was at home, and presently returned, accompanied by the staunch Canadian yeoman and his daughter, who gave us a truly hearty welcome, and assisted in removing the children from the sleigh to the cheerful fire, that made all bright and cosy within. Our host was a shrewd, humorous-looking Yorkshireman. His red, weather-beaten face, and tall, athletic figure, bent as it was with hard labour, gave indications of great personal strength, and a certain knowing twinkle in his small, clear grey eyes, which had been acquired by long dealing with the world, with a quiet, sarcastic smile that lurked round the corners of his large mouth, gave you the idea of a man who could not easily be deceived by his fellows, one who, though no rogue himself, was quick in detecting the roguery of others. His manners were frank and easy, and he was such a hospitable entertainer that you felt at home with him in a minute. "Well, how are you, Mr. S?" cried the farmer, shaking my brother heartily by the hand. "Toiling in the bush still, eh?" "Just in the same place." "And the wife and children?" "Hearty. Some half-dozen have been added to the flock since you were our way." "So much the better, so much the better. The more the merrier, Mr. S. Children are riches in this country." "I know not how that may be. I find it hard to clothe and feed mine." "Wait till they grow up. They will be brave helps to you then. The price of labour, Mr. S., is the destruction of the farmer." "It does not seem to trouble you much, Woodruff," said my brother, glancing round the well-furnished apartment. "My son and S do it all," cried the old man. "Of course the girls help in busy times, and take care of the dairy, and we hire occasionally, but small as the sum is which is expended in wages during seed time and harvest, I feel it, I can tell you." "You are married again, Woodruff?" "No, sir," said the farmer, with a peculiar smile. "Not yet," which seemed to imply the probability of such an event. "That tall gal is my eldest daughter. She manages the house, and an excellent housekeeper she is. But I cannot keep her for ever," with a knowing wink. Gals will think of getting married, and seldom consult the wishes of their parents upon the subject when once they have taken the notion into their heads. But 'tis natural, Mr. S. It is natural. We did just the same when we were young." My brother looked laughingly towards the fine, handsome young woman, as she placed upon the table hot water, whiskey, and a huge plate of plum cake, which did not lack a companion, stored with the finest apples which the orchard could produce. The young girl looked down and blushed. "Oh, I see how it is, Woodruff. You will soon lose your daughter. I wonder that you have kept her so long. But who are these young ladies?" he continued, as 3 girls very demurely entered the room. "The 2 youngest are my darters by my last wife, who, I fear, mean soon to follow the bad example of their sister. The other lady," said the old man, with a reverential air, "is a particular friend of my eldest darters." My brother laughed slyly, and the old man's cheek took a deeper glow, as he stooped forward to mix the punch. "You said that these 2 young ladies, Woodruff, were by your last wife. Pray, how many wives have you had?" "Only 3. It is impossible, they say in my country, to have too much of a good thing." "So I suppose you think," said my brother, glancing first at the old man, and then towards Miss Smith. 3 wives! You have been a fortunate man, Woodruff, to survive them all." "Ay, have I not, Mr. S.? But to tell you the truth, I have been both lucky and unlucky in the wife way." And then he told us the history of his several ventures in matrimony, with which I shall not trouble my readers. When he had concluded, the weather was somewhat milder, the sleigh was ordered to the door, and we proceeded on our journey, resting for the night at a small village about 20 miles from B, rejoicing that the long distance which separated us from the husband and father was diminished to a few miles, and that, with the blessing of Providence, we should meet on the morrow. About noon we reached the distant town, and were met at the inn by him whom one and all so ardently longed to see. He conducted us to a pretty, neat cottage, which he had prepared for our reception, and where we found old Jenny already arrived. With great pride the old woman conducted me over the premises, and showed me the furniture the master had bought, especially recommending to my notice a China tea service, which she considered the most wonderful acquisition of the whole. "Och! Who would have thought, a year ago, mistress dear, that we should be living in a mansion like this, and ating off real Chiney? It is but yesterday that we were hoeing praties in the field." "Yes, Jenny, God has been very good to us, and I hope that we shall never learn to regard with indifference the many benefits which we have received at his hands." Reader, it is not my intention to trouble you with the sequel of our history. I have given you a faithful picture of a life in the backwoods of Canada, and I leave you to draw from it your own conclusions. To the poor industrious working man it presents many advantages; to the poor gentleman, none. The former works hard, puts up with coarse, scanty fare, and submits with a good grace to hardships that would kill a domesticated animal at home. Thus he becomes independent, inasmuch as the land that he has cleared finds him in the common necessaries of life. But it seldom, if ever, in remote situations, accomplishes more than this. The gentleman can neither work so hard, live so coarsely, nor endure so many privations as his poorer but more fortunate neighbour. Unaccustomed to manual labour, his services in the field are not of a nature to secure for him a profitable return. The task is new to him, he knows not how to perform it well, and, conscious of his deficiency, he expends his little means in hiring labour, which his bush farm can never repay. Difficulties increase, debts grow upon him, he struggles in vain to extricate himself, and finally sees his family sink into hopeless ruin. If these sketches should prove the means of deterring one family from sinking their property and shipwrecking all their hopes by going to reside in the backwoods of Canada, I shall consider myself amply repaid for revealing the secrets of the prison house, and feel that I have not toiled and suffered in the wilderness in vain. The Maple Tree, a Canadian Song. Hail to the pride of the forest, hail to the maple tall and green. It yields a treasure which ne'er shall fail, while leaves on its boughs are seen. when the moon shines bright on the wintry night, and silvers the frozen snow, and echo dwells on the jingling bells as the sleighs dart to and fro. Then it brightens the mirth of the social hearth with its red and cheery glow. Afar, mid the bosky forest shades, it lifts its tall head on high, when the crimson-tinted evening fades from the glowing saffron sky. When the sun's last beams light up woods and streams, and brighten the gloom below, and the deer springs by with his flashing eye, and the shy, swift-footed doe, and the sad winds chide in the branches wide with a tender plaint of woe. The Indian leans on its rugged trunk, with the bow in his red right hand, and mourns that his race like a stream has sunk from the glorious forest land. But blithe and free the maple tree still tosses to sun and air its 1,000 arms, while in countless swarms the wild bee revels there. But soon not a trace of the red man's race shall be found in the landscape fair. When the snows of winter are melting fast, and the sap begins to rise, and the biting breath of the frozen blast yields to the spring's soft sighs, then away to the wood, for the maple good shall unlock its honeyed store, and boys and girls with their sunny curls bring their vessels brimming o'er, with the luscious flood of the brave tree's blood into cauldrons deep to pour. The blaze from the sugar bush gleams red, far down in the forest dark, a ruddy glow on the trees is shed, that lights up their rugged bark, and with merry shout the busy rout watch the sap as it bubbles high, and they talk of the cheer of the coming year, and the jest and the song pass by. And brave tales of old round the fire are told, that kindle youth's beaming eye. Hurrah for the sturdy maple tree, long may its green branch wave, in native strength sublime and free, meet emblem for the brave. May the nation's peace with its growth increase, and its worth be widely spread, for it lifts not in vain to the sun and rain its tall, majestic head. May it grace our soil, and reward our toil, till the nation's heart is dead. End of Chapter 27. Recorded in Toronto, Ontario, by Moira Fogarty, December 2010.